to listen to you what's happening on the European scene from the Brussels view.
Yes, indeed.
Please,
Thanks a lot for the opportunity and for you to go through this lengthy introduction. I'm still at a point in time where I am meeting a lot of new stakeholders, so it's always useful also to have this kind of rounds. Maybe a quick question before I start. Who here attended the EuroHeat&Powers conference on the 22nd of June? So that's good for me because you haven't seen my presentation, but definitely something you need to work on for next year. So yes, maybe a quick introduction from my side as well before I start sharing my screen, but indeed, so my name is Aurélie Beauvais and I joined EuroHeat&Powers 3 months ago on the 15th of April. I have been working over 10 years in the energy sector, but mostly on the electricity side, I have to say. 5 years for the French Electricity Association, working a lot on capacity markets, nuclear energy, these kind of things, and then 5 other years with the Solar Association, overseeing their advocacy. So I think it's been very exciting to work in the renewables area, but the most exciting thing was to see what actually you can achieve in only 5 years with a very strong presence at European level and a robust advocacy. And I think the district heating and cooling sector has already been profiling itself in a very interesting way in the past years, and with the very good job that Paul did. And we are really at a pivotal moment, I think, where we are facing both probably a very huge phase of growth, but also a very deep transformation of our sectors. And those two aspects have to go hand in hand, in particular with the decarbonization imperative, where, you know, in 2022, you can no longer say that you will not be climate neutral. That is something that is not relevant for policymakers anymore. And so to be relevant in this debate and to benefit from stronger European support rather than European attention, to have the carrot rather than the stick, we will have to work a lot also on how we portray ourselves as a sector, as part of the solution, and how we sell in a much more assumed way or outspoken way what we do, because I think this sector is really, really interesting. So yeah, that will be the work of EuroHeat&Powers in the next month. And maybe right now I can show you with this presentation some elements that are relevant, I think, in the current debate. What I wanted to start with before we talk about regulation to some extent is looking at ourselves and where we are, what are our weaknesses, if there are any, because obviously regulation is very strongly tied to the sector and what's its state of decarbonization, what are the key features of the technology and how they answer to the very concrete challenges that we have at European level in terms of energy independence and climate. So district heating and cooling today in 2018, and that's not a problem. Market intel is not always super up to date, but this is the latest figure that we have that was also re-updated with the latest TILIA report in 2022. They released a new report 2 months ago, but basically we are a third of our supply is from renewable and waste heat sources. So nearly a third of our energy supply as a sector today is clean. And that's very important also to acknowledge and remember, because if you look at the share of renewable in the electricity sector, you are today around 32%. So it is not something that is necessarily well known that actually in our sector, the share of renewable is very close to the one that we are seeing in the electricity market. And unlike the electricity market, we did not go through 10 years of energy and climate packages and supply frameworks and extensive subsidy schemes. And so I think also looking at where we are starting from, we are in a very good position also to further accelerate the decarbonation. Of course, the other side of the coin is that more than half of our energy supply today is fossil, with natural gas also that, well, accounts for 30% of our energy supply today. And obviously, in the current context, it is becoming a challenge. All the more considering that a lot of countries in Europe have identified natural gas as a transition technology for progressively phasing out their coal assets. So it is the same for the electricity sector. We are not different, but this is an important challenge today with the energy crisis. District heating and cooling today, it's also 10,000 heat networks in Europe, so covering between 12–30% of the heat market, which is already, again, a very good share to start with. I mean, if you look from the solar industry, for example, where I come from, and which was all over the place and all over the papers, it was supplying only 5% of the electricity supply. So if you look at our technology and the share that we have today in the heat market, we are already a very strong sector. We supply more than 60 million citizens today, but what's also very interesting is that 140 million citizens are living in cities which are already equipped with district heating and cooling solutions. So in terms of outreach potential, we have 140 citizens which could be supplied also by district heating or could benefit from district heating in the longer run, and that's very positive. The growth potential, quite enormous as we see it, and I think it's important also to be bold in our forecasts. So depending on where you look at, obviously we are only taking the positive, the positive outlooks, but still you have, as you know it, because all of you are researchers, you have the low scenario, the medium scenario, and you have the high scenario. So consider that here I left the pessimistic scenario aside, and we look at the medium or the high scenario. So we could provide between 30% of the future heat demand, and that's more the type of assumption that you get with the Agora Energiewende type of think tank, or 50% of the European heat demand by 2050, and that is based on the technical potential which was identified by the Heat Roadmap Europe, which all of you know, I am sure. Going to the next slide, and just a small comment that I don't see you, obviously, so if you have a pressing question, feel free to raise your hand or just interrupt me, because I'm not even sure I will see the hands. But yes, another thing that I wanted to share with you today is the outcome of the first analysis that we have made when it comes to the decarbonization pathways of our respective countries. Because if you want to be relevant at European level, that's a bit what I said earlier in the intro, you must show that you will be climate neutral, ideally well before 2050. And you also need to show a very concrete picture on how you're going to achieve this. So we had a first exercise at EuroHeat&Powers. We worked with 10 associations to assess and analyze their decarbonization roadmaps. So we had 10 countries altogether. 8 of those countries could provide for us data which was up to 2050, and 7 countries could provide comparable data when it comes to the reduction of their CO2 emissions in gram per kilowatt hour. We wanted to use this specific metrics because that's the one that is currently used by the European Commission in the legislative text that we are working on. So that was also to help us be a bit more relevant in the current legislative discussions. And as you can see on the graph, all the countries that provided such information are reaching climate neutrality by 2050, if we take into account the roadmaps. Some roadmaps are even likely to be more and more ambitious as time goes. So for example, you can see that Germany here, which is the light blue, it is portrayed to achieve climate neutrality in 2050. In fact, if you look at the most recent developments from the German government, the deadline for climate neutrality has been advanced to 2045. So it's likely that the roadmap would also be progressively updated, and that's the exercise that we will do as well. You have 4 countries that decarbonize their heat markets well before 2050, and those countries are no surprise for us, at least for 3 of them, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, and Austria. And so for Denmark, Finland, and Sweden, of course, the decarbonization also is associated with the return on experience and the fact that they started also much more earlier for deploying district heating and cooling solutions. So when we looked at achieving the decarbonization of their heat market overall, we clearly see a strong correlation between heat decarbonization and acceleration of the district heating and cooling deployment. So in the Soviet markets, at the end of in 2050, you have district heating and cooling supplying between 20 and 72% of the total heat supply. So that's also why we see growth prospects as very promising for the sector in Europe. It is also consistent with the data that we have available, which also shows clearly that when you have well-deployed district heating and cooling systems in place, you have much higher shares of renewable heat, of renewable in your heating or waste heat in your heating. And so that's also very relevant for the whole decarbonization agenda.
I think
yes.
this the picture you showed before, I think at least it was quite new to me, because in Sweden we've been talking for many years that the level of district heating will not increase. So I think, as you mentioned, this is a positive view on things.
Yeah, and it for Sweden, which is I have to say, a very particular country as well. I was in an event, which was a funny event, where everyone was basically, you know, pointing out that because someone took an example in Sweden and everyone said, yeah, but those guys, you know, they're going to be climate negative as of 2030. So it's so, you're so advanced, in fact. And so if you look at the scenarios for Sweden here, you're completely climate negative. And so I think the share also of district heating comes from the capacity also to go further, because as of 2030, climate neutrality is achieved, but then also exploring other technologies, doing carbon captation, for example. And still in the next 10 years, yes, there will be a slight increase, notably because in Sweden, you're aware that there was this electrification strategy that was or roadmap that was unleashed by the government, and electrification generates a lot of heat. So yeah, as we go also electrifying, we will need to incorporate those additional heat sources also with hydrogen, and that will, yeah, kind of naturally support further the development of the sector. So this point, I'm not going to go in depth in the graphs, and the good news is that those graphs are available, because this year we have made available for the public an executive summary of the findings from the market outlook and the 2050 roadmap. So you can have that in the website. But what I found very interesting in this overview is that you can really see, so this is the supply mix of district heating shares in the various markets. And you can clearly see that there is no single transition pathway that is like the other. The diversity of the transition we observe in district heating and cooling network, it's useful for us to also advise on policy making. And so we know there will be no one size fits all. We need to make sure we have a European framework that reflects the diversity of various transitions. You can see that, for example, we talk a lot about heat pumps. If you look at heat pumps share, large-scale heat pumps in Denmark and in Germany in particular, those shares are increasing drastically. It's 45% of the heat supply in Denmark in 2050. But it's also very much correlated with the very high shares of electrification, and the fact that the more you go with high renewable on the electricity mix, you end up with negative prices, a lot of price volatility, and which strengthens even further the business case for heat pump, for example. So in other countries which are not yet that strong for renewable electricity, and if you look at Czech Republic so far, though they have a stronger potential when it comes to biomethane, which is hugely growing. And biomethane is another technology which we see appearing in countries that are very gas reliant and are planning to progressively phase in those renewable or green fuels into, for example, their CHP units. So it was very enlightening to do this exercise, to understand that, yeah, each country has its specificity. But it's also good when we are discussing energy security, because you don't want to put all your eggs in the same basket. You don't want to have a system that is only relying on one technology, because when this technology breaks down, you have a big problem. And I think that's also one of the very strong advantage that our sector has, or that district heating and cooling has. It is really an integrator for multi-energy systems, and that is something that is becoming a very strong asset, as we see that energy interdependence are getting stronger and stronger, and the system is becoming less and less reliant because we phase out coal, so we only have gas, and for renewables we only go for wind and solar. And so this diversification is becoming very interesting from the energy independence perspective. Yet, although there are very diverse transition pathways, we can really see common patterns emerging. And so those are, I would say, three big aspects. A huge increase in renewable heat source is inevitable, and we need to be prepared for that at European level, and we need to make sure that we have also the framework that will help us achieve this supply diversification. Sustainable biomass remains an important part of the renewable future of our technology. It also remains quite stable if you look at it. So it's really about keeping what we have, and we cannot increase so much the use of biomass because we have strong political and public pressure, and we need to take that into account. It will increase, but we have strong potential for supply diversification. Geothermal has a very constant growth across all countries that we surveyed, always between 14 and 20. So that's very constant pillar across the transition pathways. Biogas, as I said earlier, but also solar thermal. In the countries that were surveyed, it was only Germany, but yeah, pretty sure that this technology will still pop up in other countries that may have been all out of the scope. Of course, solar thermal in Denmark is also growing, although comparatively with the other sources, less. The second aspect is large-scale heat pumps, and that's very important because today at European level, heat pumps are all over the place, but there is this tendency to focus much more on residential heat pumps. And so the uptake of large-scale heat pumps in the scenarios is really confirmed as exponential, and it's correlated with both geothermal, where it is available, but also, as I was saying earlier, renewable electricity uptake. The third element is waste heat, and here, yeah, it's really impressive, the share of waste heat in most of the countries surveyed. So you are between, in general, yes, 11 and 30%. And this is based on the potential that is assessed today. I have no doubt that it could grow. Also, as we said earlier, with the impact of electrification, which is very hard to factor in the scenarios, but obviously with hydrogen in particular, which is indirect electrification, but will generate a lot of heat, or with the progressive electrification of industries and data centers, we will have a lot of waste heat to recover. So based on everything that was presented before, I just want to give you also this overview that we convey a lot to policymakers, which is that district heating and cooling is, from our perspective, a Swiss Army knife to tackle the energy and climate crisis. One of the big issues that we see today in policymaking at European level is that there is really this search for the silver bullet, the one technology that will solve everything. But there is also this tendency to be very Manichaean, black and white, and to think that, yes, when looking at renewable transition, it will be only renewable electricity and only a specific type of renewable electricity. That when it comes to the transition of industry, it can only be hydrogen, etc. And so I think in this perspective, our technology is interesting because it ticks a lot of boxes, but it cannot be put in one single box at the same time. It's a very diverse technology, which can function with a lot of different energy. And that's why the multi-energy system approach is one of the key assets that we have. It doesn't matter if it's going to be hydrogen, we're going to take the heat out, we're going to maybe use it in some backup units. If it's going to be electricity, we're going to integrate it through heat pumps. If it's going to be renewable heat sources, we will integrate it directly, waste heat, etc. And that's a very good strength we have, because there is not a single energy mix in Europe that looks like the other. And that means whatever the energy mix, we will have a role to play because we can integrate this. The ability to integrate renewables is also a very strong asset because we do need more renewable in heating and cooling. The strong efficiency gains are also, it's something that you have known for a long time because you have been in the sector for a long time. I came from the electricity sector. Honestly, I discovered it, and that's quite impressive. According to Agora Energiewende, this other German think tank that is a big fan of district heating and cooling, if we were to expand, modernize our networks, we would save 125 terawatt-hour of gas structural demand by 2027. So that means in 2027, we could be importing 8% less gas, Russian gas, I have to precise. So that's 8% of the current Russian gas imports in only 5 years, and just by expanding and modernizing. So, 8% is small, but that is not negligible, especially while we are running after all possible solutions. And I think in our technology, although that's not something that can be easily heard at political level, the message is growing that also while you will be using natural gas, and you will be using natural gas in Europe for the next 10 years at least, the most efficient way to use it will always be through a heat network. And so we really start also to sell or to portray this vision where, okay, you ban the gas boilers, you switch to a heat network, you already energy efficiency that are between 40 to 60%, depending on the quality of the network. And then you phase in clean sources. And this kind of 2 steps pathway, just the switch from boiler to heat network will already generate significant energy efficiency gains and therefore contribute to solving the energy crisis that we are facing. The last aspect, it's very funny because in the sector, what I hear a lot is it takes time to deploy, it takes time, the problem is permitting, etc. It's complicated, there is an NIMBY effect because you need to open the streets, etc. Well, coming from the electricity sector, I would not call that an issue because really, when you see today the level of opposition and the delays that you have to deploying renewable electricity sources, plants, to deploy transmission grids, to deploy distribution grids in city, I think on the contrary, our technology is very well positioned. And we can have very fast deployment rates in cities. And when it comes to having your streets open, you should live in Belgium. It happens all the time. I don't think the population will be particularly pissed off with that. Okay, so maybe now the regulation, and I'm cautious of the time. I will be just providing you the overview, and then we can have the Q&A. The question is, do we have everything that is needed to reach our full potential at European level, but also to harvest all the benefits of our technology as we see it? Well, you will not be surprised. The answer is a bit yes, but I will start with the Fit for 55, which is the current big package we have been working on. And the truth is that there are a lot of good elements in the Fit for 55. The most important thing we need to work on now is to make sure that this package anchors very strongly the importance of our sector, because there will be a next political mandate and there will be new initiatives. But if we are not strongly represented, and if we don't have an enabling framework in the Fit for 55, that could be a deal breaker. For example, in buildings, the legislation on EED and EPBD will be very critical, because then this renovation wave is going to be kickstarted. And if we're not in, we cannot go back on that. Nevertheless, in terms of, for example, waste heat integration, there is a stronger awareness, a real awareness actually at European level, that it has to be dealt with on an equal basis with renewable. You have a strong push for cities to conduct heat planning. You have good emphasis on the benefits of the technology to ensure stability and efficiency in systems that are more and more renewable based. We have finally the equal treatment of on-site renewable or sustainable sources in building and nearby, which is also very good for the acknowledgement of our technology when assessing building performance, and therefore when defining building performance policies. And we also have faster procedures for renewable permitting, which will be useful for solar heat and geothermal, although the current procedures are really focused on wind and solar in particular, and so we may need to work further on specific provisions for geothermal. The bad aspects, as we see it, we really were keen to push a price signal for CO2 in the building sector, but there are very strong concerns when it comes to the social impact of it. And that's really a pity because, yes, there is a social impact, but that is not something that is new. We've known that for 10 years. And it's a pity that instead of working on solutions to actually solve the social inclusiveness issue at European level, we are still in a moment where we decide to postpone ambitions because of that. It could have been dealt with much earlier, but at this point in time, the phase-in for ETS in buildings is 2029, and there is a big concern that it would lock in further individual boilers, in particular in the building sector. The second aspect is that, as I was saying earlier quickly, we have huge pressure on the use of biomass, especially for the parliament level. And this is something we need to be aware of, although we don't foresee that we will have a bad outcome thanks to the council and member states. It will come back every year until we have much stronger provisions in place. The ugly part is the waste incineration, which is still a very important source of supply for a lot of networks. And here they want to include it in the EU ETS in particular, but also if you look at ongoing negotiations on the taxonomy, waste incineration plants are not eligible according to the sustainable finance taxonomy, whereas, for example, natural gas is. So there's a bit of a schizophrenia here, which is also mostly motivated by emotions. And we need to work further on the perception of this technology. And probably the current crisis will help because we cannot both drastically reduce natural gas, cut biomass, cut waste incineration, and deploy renewable heat and waste heat. It cannot be done. The second big package that we had was the REPowerEU. So that was the package in May, which was specifically dedicated to strengthening the independence of Europe from gas imports. And here, I think we can really see that heating is back in the game and that district heating and cooling is becoming more and more acknowledged as a critical part of the solution. We are not at the core of the REPowerEU, let's not lie to ourselves, but what we know as well is that the paper was done very quickly, which was confirmed by the Commission. And we had a meeting with their Deputy Director General on Tuesday, our board meeting, where actually she confirmed that they are really much looking into our technology when it comes to the future measures that will be promulgated. Nevertheless, we have good provisions for awareness. I think it's clear. We have also concrete market push provisions, which are worked on, in particular for the phase out of subsidies for fossil boilers. We also see support for a connection to district heating network and heat pump deployment. And a lot of countries are embarking on this road, banning boilers and having either mandatory connection to heat network or heat pumps. And we will have new eco-design requirements for fossil fuel boilers starting in 2029. And this could be really a game changer. We also have new opportunities for diversification, in particular the Biomethane Action Plan, which will support countries like Czech Republic, Hungary, Bulgaria, but also, for example, Germany, to have more access to green gases. We have the solar energy strategy, where solar thermal is also a direct beneficiary and could be further developed in the next years, and a targeted amendment to the Renewable Energy Directive, which will ask member states and locality to dedicate go-to areas for renewable deployment. So that will be useful for heat pumps, integrating renewable electricity, for solar thermal in particular, and to a lesser extent for geothermal, although here we are mostly facing de-risking issues. The last element is that we will have new funding opportunities. So they have decided that member states would have to reopen their recovery and resilience plans, which was the plans for spending recovery and resilience money. And they have to use much more, for example, the loans that could be granted at European level to plan further investments in energy in particular. So renewable and waste heat are clearly acknowledged in the guidelines that were published by the Commission as investments that have to be taken into account. The only caveat here is that we see a lot of issues from our members to access this kind of funding. And therefore, we are also working with the Commission to understand how we can unlock. It's good to have a funding envelope, but if you cannot spend it, it's a bit worthless. So we are making sure that those new funding envelope will effectively trigger new investments. So that was very dense, and I apologize for it. I was a bit longer than planned, but now I'm happy to take questions.
So
Lars, I just have a comment before Sami takes questions. This is the most positive and best presentation I had heard orally. It was great to listen to you speak and your presentation with all this positiveness. So thank you very much. I have questions later on, but I'll leave it to the others.
Thank you.
I totally agree. Thank you. Very good. We are happy to have friends out there in the EU to work for the district heating future. Going back to given the fact that, as you mentioned, electrification will give us a lot of opportunities in terms of use waste heat in the systems. We also see the challenges in the existing district heating system, that we have a difference in the temperature, as you know, since many industries will have a big amount of energy in a low temperature scale. What do you see from a European perspective in terms of preparing existing system to be able to take care of that waste heat? Do you see any technologies that are developed that we can share in some way, since we are working a lot with this in Sweden now?
Technologies, you mean to facilitate the uptake of lower temperature networks?
Yeah. And also maybe to upgrade the lower temperatures to higher temperatures in existing systems.
So it is indeed a challenge. I think at European level, we will mostly be looking at legislation. And here, I think we still need to understand as a sector how, what are the concrete milestones we need to actually have a system that is fit for purpose, a 4G system or 5G system in the longer run, but at least a 4G system. Because policymakers, that's a very concrete question they ask us. It's not on the technology side, but they say, what do you need to go there? What type of regulatory milestones we can put in place to facilitate this. And this is an element that we will work on at our strategy board meeting in September, although I'm happy to take suggestions here. On the technology perspective, I think there is a lot of innovation going on. We have a lot of innovations, and probably the big question is the same as in many other sectors, how you go from TRL 3 to TRL 7, and then when you're at TRL 7, how you actually favor the market uptake of the solutions that you have been developing. In our DHC Plus platform, I've seen a lot of interesting projects for lower temperature district heating systems, for integration of waste heat, etc. But I think our sector needs to mobilize the European Union a bit more when it comes to identifying the technologies that are most likely to be the winners, and it's not clear from the sector perspectives, and then favoring the industrial uptake of those technologies. Sorry, I'm not super precise in my answer, but
it's okay. But my point is, I think this might be in an area where we could cooperate more within the European Union in terms of finding good solutions. And as you know, in Sweden, there is a lot of research on the next third generation of district heating system and so on, also the fourth and so on. And the second question on that will be, how will the carbon footprint be counted in terms of what type of electricity has been used to create that spill heat? And that's also a question that has been raised in the Swedish system. Do you understand the question? As you know, as you mentioned before, waste incineration is not supposed to be a part of the EU ETS, but in Sweden and Denmark it is.
Yes.
And this is also, of course, a question that has been raised in Sweden in terms of using spill heat, where you have fossil fuel that has created the electrified company or the industry. And that's, of course, for instance, the cement industry is one example on that.
So, for the compatibility between the ETS systems, I think of course there will be a system of harmonization between Sweden or Denmark, which already had this kind of things in place. What you're asking for is basically how you account for the green credential of waste heat.
Yeah.
With the electricity that is being produced. So that's an open question. That's a critique that we receive directly, often indeed from the Commission. For example, yes, but this waste heat is produced from fossil fuels or emitting sources. Here, most of the cement industry, for example, is exposed to the EU ETS. So the cement industry is already paying for the fossil fuel it is using, and it is already paying for the emissions that it is producing. So the waste heat in this regard is not adding any emission to that. So one aspect to see this is that, according to the polluter pay principle, the carbon content of what that has been used to produce this waste heat is already paid for and taken into account into the ETS. So you don't actually add emission when you use the waste heat. On the contrary, you could see it in a way that you maximize the energy output for the same emission levels of CO2. And this is more how I see it, because so far this heat is not being used. So you're actually maximizing the CO2/energy use ratio. But in the longer run, we are also very much looking into, it's not necessarily related to waste heat in industry, but industries are going to decarbonize. So then the more their energy supply will decarbonize, the more the waste heat will be decarbonized as well. And just to say that at European level, there is a stronger and stronger interest on heat purchase agreement or power purchase agreement for heat production. In particular, if you look at heat pumps, you could perfectly envisage a power purchase agreement where even if you retrieve the electricity from the grid, and let's say the electricity from the grid is 40% renewable, you have a power purchase agreement which covers the entirety of the electricity consumed with a renewable plant elsewhere. And that is how most of the electricity industries are decarbonizing themselves today, like data centers. So heat purchase agreement and power purchase agreements are likely to come more strongly into the play for green credentials of heat.
I think this is a very important question, because I think it's very important that we really don't come in a situation where waste heat is classified as non-climate neutral. I think we should
Absolutely.
go for that for 100%. And that includes waste incineration. That's a problem we have in Sweden today, that we are part of the ETS system. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Although maybe I think it will be important to distinguish waste incineration from waste heat. I know we don't do it in the sector today, but I think from a political and strategic perspective, it will be important to take those separately, because I think the rationale for one or the other are completely different. You have net CO2 emissions in waste incineration, for example, which you can then captate. But for waste heat, as I said, we consider there is none. And yeah, the sector has had a tendency to put a lot of things in the same basket, like saying that waste heat is renewable heat. And I think that's also part of the things that in the mind of policymakers is not working, because they're like, but no, you're lying. Renewable, it's geothermal, it's solar thermal, it's wind, whatever. It's not that. And so I think we should not shy away from the different technologies that we have in our toolbox, and probably develop a specific narrative for each of those, because though I agree with you, we need both of them and we will fight hard for it.
Good, thank you.
I see Åsa raised her hand.
Yes, thank you. But about the ETS and waste heat situation, I see a big problem. And as I understood, this is also a question, as I understood it, this is the Swedish interpretation with the opt-in system with the EU ETS. We currently have, I think, 3 or 4 industries in Gothenburg who are wanting to deliver waste heat to our system, and we would very much like to have that waste heat, but if they deliver heat to us, they are opted in to the EU ETS system, and that is seen as too administratively much of a load for them to be opted in. And I see that as a big barrier for us to have the waste heat that we could have in the system. And I don't know if that is just a Swedish interpretation of the ETS, or do you know if this is something bigger that is, and are you working to change that, because that would be very useful for us?
You guys, those are tough questions. Okay.
Sorry.
I will always buckle up with Pauline Luca, which is in our team, the one working in more details for the ETS. But from what I know, I think maybe just one question back to you, because industries are already exposed to the EU ETS, especially the large ones.
These are too small to be in the ETS. So the big industries in Gothenburg, they
Yes,
are already in,
yes,
and
yes.
that's no problem. But we have a couple of smaller that are not in the system.
And so if they were to sell waste heat, they would then be automatically integrated in the ETS.
Because there's a sentence that if you are connected to a heating system that is bigger than 20 megawatts, you have to be opted into the ETS system. And we have had like consultancies calculating how much the workload would be for them. They have their processes on biogas, I think all free, that has been so that it would be too much of an administrative load for them. So yeah, maybe this is just a Swedish interpretation of the ETS. I know there's been a memo from Naturvårdsverket to change this, but it hasn't been here so far. I don't know if anyone else of you know if this is only a Swedish thing.
So we have not identified that, I can tell you, as part of our, key red lights for ETS, but I think that's an interesting interpretation. So yeah, quite happy to receive more elements from you. I can put my address in the chat.
Yeah, and I can send you the details.
If you can, yes, and then we'll make sure we follow up, because if this interpretation stands, indeed, that's an issue.
Thank you.
Magnus, you said you had some questions.
Yes, another paper of questions. But I think you answered most of them. I just have a question. Celsius has been nearly longer than EuroHeat&Powers, I think. I don't know. And in the beginning, the whole idea with the Celsius project was to advocate for the heating and cooling as an energy vehicle. How would you like us to contribute and support? I mean, Celsius incorporate quite a lot of cities, and which are complementary to EuroHeat&Powers. I mean, in your quest now, because this is super important, and whatever we can do is supports us too and our clients.
Thank you for this question. I like when help is offered, because we do need it. So the first way, absolutely, mayors, I think. Mayors and cities are a very interesting layer of governance that we should mobilize further to ask for more focus. And so we've been trying to work a bit with also energy cities in this regard, but we also need their help to pass on our messages, because they are also big users. So for example, in the Repower EU and for the future framework, I think if we could be able to mobilize your network, also to have, I don't know, some declarations signed by cities that want more focus on district heating, or that help us fight back specific elements in the regulation, I think that would be really interesting. So to be able to mobilize this network politically, and we'll make sure that we also have Aksana bridging that when it happens. The other element is really the identifying in more concrete aspects the barrier and or what is needed from a local perspective, also in terms of regulation, because we tend so far to simply say we need heat plannings, we need mandatory heat plannings, and maybe we need, state aid or dedicated resources so that cities can carry up their heat planning. But once they've done the heat planning, we're still far away from having the network that is effectively developed. So what are the steps? Are there concrete obstacles? You are in direct contact with those stakeholders, and so you're best placed to be able to feed back this information to us, and that would be very interesting. Also in terms of best practices.
Good. It will be relevant for another 100 years. That's good.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
Have another. Emilia have raised her hand.
I put you on the big screen so I could see you better. A couple of months ago, we had a presentation from Brian Vad Mathiesen from Aalborg University. So he's done a lot of research with cities and development of heating systems. And one of his predictions for this fall and this winter was that we might even have to take very drastic measures to reduce our dependency on Russian gas. He said even maybe families, multi-family homes, we're going to have to move together. Some people might have to move into, for example, colleges or common spaces. Do you think that's really something that we're going to be seeing? And what do you see? So, two-fold question. And what do you see as the biggest obstacle in reducing our dependency on Russian gas? Because the technology is there, the want is there, but what do you see as the biggest obstacle?
Are we gonna have to take drastic measures? I hope not, but I fear yes. I don't know. The thing is that, yes, very concretely, the challenge is huge. Very concretely, little can be done in 6 months. And we know that that Russia will have a very strong bargaining power in winter, and that would be very silly not to use it, or I would definitely use it. So indeed, I think, and that's also why currently, without introducing panic, because I think first it's pointless, but yes, the European Union is working like hell to try and find routes, but whatever the solutions that we have, whether it's diversifying LNG supply with the US, opening new supply routes with Algeria or Kazakhstan, deploying district heating, deploying heat pumps, you name it, it will not happen before December. So whatever, what we would be able to achieve by the end of the winter is maybe to lower some temperatures in the network, to have ask operators, and that's what the Commission is thinking, that, okay, they just lock the temperature to certain levels. Because if you look at the potential for gas savings in the next 6 months, that's where it is. So the biggest bulk can be achieved by every citizen lowering their heat supply by 1.5 degree. And 1.5 degree because it's politically acceptable, but then imagine if you lower it by 2 degrees, and yeah, that's also somehow, we're getting a bit philosophical here, but that's also the whole problem with the transition, that at some point people want the key shining technology, but the truth is that it's also very much a behavioral issue. The same way that, yeah, all of us, we need to be more cautious, and yes, all of us, if we actually lower our temperatures at the end of the year, we may be able to significantly contribute to strengthening our reliance. And if not, there will be drastic measures in place. But yeah, let's see what happens. And so for the main obstacles, behavior, maybe we will need to look, gas boilers also, honestly. Because it's true that, okay, we will not, switching from gas to another source is complex. You need to electrify, you need to develop the others. Do you have the infrastructure in place? But switching from gas to a heat network powered by gas already generates significant savings, and boilers in general are extremely inefficient. So I think we should also be much bolder at European level when it comes to removing and replacing those devices. And in a way that also the government is taking responsibility for that, because I think they rely a lot on citizens to do this. And here I don't agree that they should take care of that. There should be subsidies to replace it. There should be an element in place to do that. And that's where the third bottleneck is, skills. We have no workers, we have no installers. We need an army of workers to put that in place, and we don't have them. So yeah, it's a big challenge.
I see Johan raised his hand.
Yes, I don't know if we have time for more questions, but I was thinking about the electrification of heating, and I'm all for power to heat, and but I also see a difficulty in how. We have a lot of waste heat already in our system in Stockholm and in every district heating network. And of course, it's more available in summer when the demand is low, and scarce in the winter when it's as much needed the most. And it's also a problem between the tariff of district heating and the energy cost or for houses to produce waste heat to the system. So, I mean, if you recover heat with electricity in summertime in a house, it could be beneficial economically for this house. But for the system, it would be the opposite, that we would actually have for the energy system in total, we would have a better waste heat source than maybe using a domestic heat pump with a ground source heat pump, for instance. So I mean, how can we push for a lower district heating tariff to get an income from the energy system point of view? I mean, do you understand what I mean? If we are balancing the electricity system, it should be a benefit for the system, and that benefit would be higher than what the district heating tariff is actually suggesting. So what I would hope for the future is that we could lower the tariff on the district heating and getting in some kind of income from the overall energy system to actually reduce the electricity dependence of the heating sector. And have you any thoughts about how that could be achieved?
Oh, that's a relevant question as we talk more and more about system integration. I think just starting with the obstacle. If you look at electricity, because the problem that you're mentioning is going to be the same for storage, you know, at what point in time for battery storage, it's more economical to store or to release. What is the remuneration of the operator as to in the market? That's when you provide balancing services. So when you store at a time where it's necessary, you actually provide a balancing service and you are remunerated for that. Because there is an integrated market, short-term markets, long-term markets, and those markets have been harmonized across the European Union. If you look at the heat market, we have no such thing. So that's also the first thing, that today there is no market rule, and in fact, no one wants market rule. I know that's a very exy field for me to work on, also with the members, because it's necessary to some extent to have minimum level of developing the services as you point them. But systems are differing a lot between countries. Some countries are extremely vertically integrated. They set the tariffs. Other countries are, much more diverse with different ownership systems, external players, and you are more close, at least, to a liberalized market where you can start talking more about price signals. And that's very hard because the business model differs. So the tariff approach differs depending on the level of integration of the district heating network and the players around that. So there's no answer to that, although I fully agree, you are right. And we will be working on it on system integration at EuroHeat&Powers. We are considering creating as well a dedicated working group for that, because it's also valid for thermal storage in general. I mean, how are we going to support the system? How are we going to be remunerated for that? And how do you bundle the electricity and the heat market, considering that today we have 27 heat markets? So that will be a big challenge.
Yeah, because I think it's one thing to look at the overall system benefit, and it's quite easy to say when we should save electricity and when we should use it for storage via thermal storage. But it's another thing of demanding for houses association, for instance, to stop their heat pump when it's actually beneficial for them economically to still run it. So I think there's an important mismatch, and I have a fear that somehow it needs to be changed.
Yes.
Okay, I think that will be the last question because we are running out of time. But thank you very much for this presentation. It was very positive to us, I think. So I think we will see you soon or in the future at least. So this was very good. And
Indeed.
this was also the last webinar we had within Celsius for the summer. So we see you all
Super.
in autumn or August. So.
Yeah. And
Goodbye,
Lars,
everyone.
I think
Thank you for
maybe
having me.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Och glad sommar till alla.
Ja, glad
Sommar.
sommar.
Glad sommar.
Engelska.
Ja.
Eller dalmål eller något.